All right, so welcome everybody. We're live streaming today to the CSRA private group and to a few other channels as well, talking about membership sites. As we promised last week, Andy, we'd be talking about membership sites versus non-membership sites, and I know that that's a topic that you have a lot of interest in. But I know that now during these times, associations have really had to pivot regarding how they display their information, really making sure they ensure some member value. But at the same time, there's the balance of, you have to have some SEO value, search engine optimization value, so people can find you in the first place. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And for those of you who are joining us via the live stream on Facebook, just go ahead and submit a question through the comments, and we'll try to get to them. But Andy, why don't you go ahead and start out with some of your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so speaking, we're both in Washington State. You're the Director of Communications for the Washington Hospitality Association. And so I can speak more directly to the hub that you had created. You had a members-only hub, which it predates COVID, and I found it to be immediately useful. And this is coming from an allied perspective where I work for a broadline distributor. I am their resident restaurant consultant, and people will come to me with a variety of issues or problems that they are looking for solutions for. And often, because there are so many disconnected or connected pieces within a restaurant, one of my first questions are you a member of your association? And if so, that gives us a path of discovery towards resources. Sometimes it's a product, sometimes it's a service, and sometimes it's information. And to have that knowledge that they are looking for information that only they can apply to how relevant it is to them, but without my own filter getting in the way, to have that members only hub in contrast to the public facing hub, it has been a good tool to share. And really, when it comes down to it, I don't need to provide all the solutions. I just need to get them there. And so it kind of helps me look good too, that I knew something that they didn't, was able to connect them to it.
Now, do you have problems with members getting access to that? I know that we get a lot of queries for their emails not working or they didn't receive the login information, and then we deal with them one at a time. Right now, the system has over 1,000 members in it now, and that's pretty good, for considering it hasn't been up for more than really a year or so, and so. Yeah. It's gotten some traction, but access-wise, have you observed any challenges that folks have had accessing it, or has that been that hasn't been an issue at all?
No, not necessarily. I mean, to be honest, I've had a couple of issues with the last few emails that I've come through. I went to click on a link and it wouldn't let me, and I was able to dig in and realize that it was my own settings and not your settings. But I'm probably that much more technologically savvy enough to identify that than maybe an average user, or let's be honest, I'm not running a restaurant, so I kind of have the time and attention to figure things out. And so I could see that being an issue, but there's one point that I want to circle back on, and something that I've heard feedback from, this might be of value to a lot of our viewers, is that once I'm able to point someone in the right direction, the information or the, maybe it's an allied solution or a program or a service that they're able to access from the association. Once I have that conversation and they go there and they find it, I usually get a round of applause or a thank you. It's like, you know what? I had no idea that this was available to me as an association member. And time again, I learned that this person, they invest in their association because of political advocacy or because of this one cost-saving solution. And they don't think about the other facets of benefit that they can get from their association. This gives me an opportunity to drive them there and increase their awareness of what's available, and which I can only assume, increases their engagement and enthusiasm for membership renewal.
Yeah, one of the things when we first set that up was figuring out what is of real sensitive value that we can't really distribute to the public, right? So there's things like we have this restaurant operations manual that you've seen, Andy. It's called the Hero Manual, and it's 300 pages long, and the association works with a number of government agencies on getting this information. Obviously, that's something, and we've been trying to get that to be more digital because it's such an expensive publication to print.
Yes,
And it was, what's that? Yeah, it's huge, and it's actually really expensive. And but these times when everything has gone digital now over the past year, it's validated that move to really kind of upgrade our digital presence for some of these resources. So that's been a benefit because people have been able to get the most current version of the Hero Manual versus waiting a year or talking with their area representatives and trying to get the latest snippet on labor and industries ruling, right?
Yeah. And, it's as much as things change, as quickly as things changed a year ago, they're changing even faster now. I mean, I feel like we're building a car as we drive it. And to have a printed copy today that was maybe printed off at the beginning of the year, I don't know how much confidence I would have on, probably 10 different categories of legislation or legalese or whatever topic that it seemed to be covering. So I think having a digital is, that's not only where we are now, but we're not going back. We're going to keep going in that direction.
Well, that's the, you're right. I think we are going to have more and more information going digital only, and that's going to make this question even more valuable. Is it members only? Is it not members only? What do you see as the balance? Because obviously you can't just go to, it's not like your Amazon Prime, right? I mean, even Amazon Prime, you've got some public facing things and you've got some private facing things. That might not be the best example, but for associations that have a lot of information, there's that information challenge of sharing what should be public so that people in the industry who aren't members might be able to find them. There's also the issue of members who just don't want another login, right? That's a big issue. But then there's also the issue of driving member value. And in order to do that effectively online, oftentimes that relates to having a secure access website.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that, and I'm going to ask you a question about it. So, my response is going to be from a user perspective, and my user perspective is to have the, I'm going to keep using you as an example, have the wahospitality.org website that I go to, and that has, it's kind of a local industry news feed. So that's it may not give me a rich well of actionable information, but it's going to increase my awareness and give me context that I can apply towards whatever decision tree that I'm climbing. And then have the members only, which thankfully you've opened up to a broader swath of the public during these times, but that's not going to last forever. That's going to give me more in the minute actionable insights and access to resources that may not be as surface level as what I'm going to find on the main site. But here's my question to you, Lex. That is a tightrope to walk. So what decision tree are you following in terms of identifying what goes on the public facing wahospitality.org and what you got to kind of have to have a member's pass to get by the bouncer?
Well, I think that the way I navigate through it, it's been helpful because, and you've been in the industry for so long, so you can view things from a member's perspective as well. But to really put yourself in the member's shoes, right? What would I pay for, right? And what would motivate me enough to the point where I would actually register for something and save the login information with the expectation of coming back for more information. That's a decision tree that we all face every day as we get an email asking us to be a member of this, to be a member of that, to sign up for this service, to sign up for that service, right? And so, the decision to keep, CBS All Access or the decision to keep Netflix. Well, who has Star Trek, right? So easy decision for me. So, so one of the things that's what I think that it's important in deciding this, because it's not a cut and dry thing. And I think that, the closest thing to a cut and dry answer would be news should be public, right? If you are an industry expert and it's your job to broadcast or relay news to the industry for the benefit of the industry. So let's say right now it's been a constant breaking news cycle for us, and we have people who come in and we have members of our government affairs team who are getting information every day about legislation and updates. Well, that's information that we need to share with the industry, member or no member, right? Obviously, the members will get the benefit of being part of our email list, being part of our resource, so they're more likely to receive this information. But if there's an increase in minimum wage, if there's an increase in reopening percentages for restaurants or hotels in Washington State, that's a big deal that affects everybody. And so that's the line. And then for the how, like, okay, so the state just announced that we are now raising taxes on all restaurant businesses, right? Let's say, theoretically.
Hypothetically, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the what. Well, where we decide on what goes behind the firewall, what goes behind the secure area, is the how. Because the what, everybody can pick up the Seattle Times or the New York Times or whatever, and they know what the news is. And we're just one of 1,000 news outlets that members are privy to, that they can access. But where do we have the exclusive on? Well, we have the exclusive on how to implement or how to navigate through this increase in taxes or increase in minimum wage or new regulation that could potentially help or hinder a business. So we have, as you know, we've got this stable of experts and resources like yourself that we always tap on and we work with very closely to provide valuable information for our members, whether it's a tutorial, whether it's a legal memo, whether it's any other kind of documentation that will tell the member, how do I deal with this? This is such a big deal. It could affect, I will have to, I might have to lay off half my staff. But if I'm a member of the association, they put together this little, this legal memo giving me an advisory on what I could exempt and what I can't exempt. And that could save me thousands of dollars. Or how do I access that?
Right. Yeah. So a couple points come to mind as you were talking. And one of them that I think is really the value add for having an association capture that information and re-represent it is that there's so many information bubbles right now, and you don't know who you can trust. And I think what associations do well, what your association does well, is you're capturing a lot of information that is written in government speak or in lawyer talk, and it doesn't, it might as well be half Chinese for the average restaurateur that whose attention is razor thin as it is. And to have information that is being captured and translated and recontextualized in a real way for restaurant owners, I think that having that trusted information stream or that trusted place where they can go to verify, this seems like it's this, but I just need to understand it in restaurant speak. And I think that's invaluable for people, that if you can provide that. And the second point that I kind of already touched on was that information is everywhere, and we've gotten to a point where you just can't really trust it. It really comes down to questioning the motivation of the person presenting it, and to have an association that is basically bare bones business that's unique to you, not only to your industry, but your region in the country or the world, or your cuisine segment. Having those filters already applied makes it a resource that I don't think is hard to avoid. Once you recognize that it's there, it's hard not to use it.
Well, and that's really good point about interpreting things for the industry, because you've been involved long enough to know that legislative speak is not the speak that restaurateurs like to listen to. They don't understand. They're not lawyers. And so they want it condensed down, because they could either, or regulatory speak, right? When labor and industries or Department of Revenue issues a new mandate or a new regulatory change, oftentimes you've seen those documents. It's like, how do you read this? Well, we've got a team here that translates that for you. And so, and moreover, we don't just translate it, we curate it in a way that anybody can understand, right? So you don't It's something that, there's so much stuff out there, and it's very easy to get confused. And so that's a big part of what associations do. I think that's also a big part of what you do, Andy. I mean, you're talking to members, you're talking to restaurants every day, and they've got to navigate through, things like food service and all that. And you got to tell them, hey, this is why the cost of olives are this high now, right?
Yeah. It's funny. You had mentioned Star Trek a little bit ago, and I know that we both respond to that. Our nerd sides respond to that, but I was also part of your team, and I was one of those people that was from the industry, and I wasn't alone, but we would get some information through, say, government affairs, and they knew how to communicate some of that to their more business-minded board members. But then it would pass through another filter, and it's like, well, what do you think? And I said, well, this, let me understand it so that I can explain it. And I bring up Star Trek because so often there's that dynamic of somebody starts talking about the quantum phase of a flux capacitor, and then somebody comes in. It's like, oh, it's like when you stick a fork in a toaster. That it gives you that opportunity to kind of play that voice and really kind of bring it down into simple speak that can get somebody a foundation of context to stand on, so they can start to process and understand the more complicated information that follows it.
Well, I think that, and that's true. And that brings us back to the fundamental question: to member, or to members only, or not to members only.
Yeah.
And I think that the answer to that is there's got to be a hybrid. There's got to be, because you are a association for the industry, and you have to be sensitive to that. So you have to have a public facing side. And the way that, we do it as an organization is we relay news and things. That's what's public. That's what we post about on Facebook. But then all of a sudden, when we have more recently with the PPP and the employee retention credits is a huge deal that could save restaurants hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah. And yet not too many people know about it. So we have a fellow who Rick Bra, who did a seminar or a webinar for us. And it was probably the most valuable 20 minutes that you could imagine. I mean, this is a guy who usually charges maybe $500-700 an hour to his clients. He's got some of the largest restaurants in his portfolio, yet he is giving direct advice on what he's telling his clients to do in regards to the employee retention credits. And then that is something that we make available to members only. That's how you navigate it. And you really should do both. I mean, I kind of cringe when I hear people talking absolutes, right? And there's that old Yoda saying, "Only the Sith deal with absolutes," right? Our geek side here, and but in this case, you have to have a little bit of both, right?
Mm-hmm. So, Lex, here's a question for you that ties directly into this CSRA audience. Some states don't quite have the infrastructure or the bandwidth to have a developed communications team. What kind of advice would you give to some of those states that, to communicate some of these more high-level, important, vital decision point related things? They don't have a team on their side, and sometimes it's just their CEO just needs to get these alerts out. What advice do you have to them?
Well, I think, establishing your process is really important. Having to make sure that you have, there's a lot of things that technology can do to help you, right? And the more complex that your system is, the more layers of difficulty that you'll have in getting your message out to your members and to your public. So, I really encourage people to establish a good best practices, whatever that might be, on what your decision tree is and what goes public, what goes private, and also take advantage of repurposing. I think that, people, and this is a big thing that I believe in, especially if you're a communication staff of one, you should be repurposing everything. You should have that one webinar that you do. Let's say you only do one webinar a month, right? And then it's a public facing webinar, but it's primarily a members only type of thing. But of course you invite some folks there. Well, that the old business model is you publish that webinar, and the people who attended it, let's say you got 100 attendees, and then maybe you replay it on Zoom and you get another 100 people who watch it on Zoom. That's the old model. As a one-person communication staff, let's say that you are only a one-person communication staff, that, what you would do with that is you take that and then you see, okay, well, what can I do with this 1-hour webinar on a very important topic on applying for PPP funding, or how do we get exemptions, or whatever it might be. And then look through that and say, okay, what's the member value here? And then I would then dissect that information, and then you would parse it out. And you could do that. There's tools out there that allow you to do that. You don't have to be a Final Cut jock or a Premiere Pro jock. You could use tools like WeVideo, Movely, all these. There's a bunch of online tools that are available that are very inexpensive that you could do, and you could parse out those videos, and then you could say, okay, well, now I've parsed out these videos. How am I going to have time to write all of this stuff? Well, there's two ways to do that, right? I use a transcription service that's very inexpensive, or you could also, have it. Let's say you have a staff of one, or you have contractors. You could also have them regurgitate it in written format. All of a sudden, that 1-hour video turns into, let's say, 5 subsegments of valuable information, and then you turn those into written pieces of content. Now, how do you turn that into paid pieces of content? Well, maybe the idea is, maybe I should turn this into an exclusive, maybe it's a 5 webinar set, 2 webinars over per month for the next 2 months plus 1, and it's specifically addressing PPP. Then this is where you need to be strategic, right? You can't just do whatever. You need to be strategic. Well, my idea here is to do all this over a 2-month period, and with the goal in mind that I'm going to have 10 course level videos that will have generated that I could parse into several different lessons. And what do I do with that? I can create an online course that's member only, or at the very least, an online dashboard that gives them an online toolkit that's accessible for members only. So that's the way you have to be both strategic about it, and you really should use outsource, and you should use technology as much to your favor as possible. But it can be done.
So if you were to even bring it down to even more basic component, just by putting out the effort to create this unique local perspective content or translation tool on something that may be a little more complex or nebulous, this could be used just basically for membership retention and prospecting or recruitment. And so, there, I guess, would be more of a passive income there. But do you find that at the Hospitality Association, you have membership professionals? Do they use these information opportunities as a prospecting tool, or do they use it to deepen their relationships to drive retention?
Well, I think they definitely use information as a prospecting tool, But I think, moreover, the membership team was probably the most excited when they realized that we are going to roll out a members-only section. We've been asking for that for years, because they said, why are you giving everything away for free? And I said, well, we have to build our audience on some of those things. But now when I saw that the audience and the audience need is changing, and that we need to start preparing people for the next iteration of online presence, a big part of that is going to be a member access area. And it's not because we want to keep people out. It's because we want to add functionality in. By having a member-only area, we're going to be able to curate that information very specifically to our hotel members, to our restaurant members, to our quick service and full service members, and we can have information curated for each segment in the end. And that would save them time and be a more valuable resource for everybody.
Well, there's perception of value too. Going to the airport, if you're part of the President's Club, you get to go into a lounge that other people can't step in. They're stuck at the Cinnabon, and so it does give you that that insider feeling where you're having that much more of a richer relationship. And I can't help but to also recognize that for a while you had a very popular magazine that would go out, and that was a member only piece of information. But as trends and expenses and all the other factors that go into it, the print model is fading away, and you've got to replace it with something, right?
And here's what we're looking at. And this is just, this kind of just, I'm thinking out loud here, right? One of the things that typically with print, and you're part of the team, so how much it costs. It can cost anywhere from $70,000 to over $100,000 over the course of 1 year to be able to distribute a professional, I really want to emphasize professional magazine to a membership, and that includes mailing and some of those things. And oftentimes we'd be able to offset that because of advertising, right? We're able to offset that, and you did a lot of that as well, where we were able to, minimize the cost because we had advertising revenue come in to help support it. Well, think about this in perspective. What if you spent that $100,000, split it in half, and dedicated $50,000 to developing your own online or your own mobile application, and to maintain that? Because one, the challenge is trying to reach your members via email, via web. Well, if they're a member, if you're a member, if you've paid your $500 check or $1,000 or whatever the amount might be, you're going to download the app because you want to get the most out of your membership. And that's what it's a reverse thinking. And, Andy, you were here for one out of the two apps that I built for the association. One was an event app, right? And then the first one, it was the very first thing I did was just a generalist mobile app. But those were kind of, experimental, I guess. It didn't really capture, there wasn't a why. Well, now there's a why, because you need to provide members a way to hear your information as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Right.
And unless you have that direct conduit, unless you want your membership team to be calling these people all the time, or if you're going to have a dialogue with them, the only possible conduit for that is having a a mobile application that is on their phone and on their iPads or on their Samsung devices, and or other Google devices. Want to be politically correct here, where they will get that push notification, and where then when they open it up, they'll say, "Okay, this is information curated just for me." Oh, there's a new manual up. There's a new legal memo up. There's a new thing, so that. And it gets away all that noise from email and web and social media, all that stuff. It's just you and the member, right? Yeah. And that's what we want to try to capture. That's worth $50,000.
And you mentioned a couple things that make me think that there's a consideration point that may be valuable for a lot of the association CEOs or C-level administrators. In that, when you said about $70,000 to produce that magazine over a year, I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that factors in all of the labor that went into the graphic design and the writing and the interviewing and the resource gathering to create the content that would populate that magazine, and or the labor that goes into having your area coordinators, your membership professionals, ensuring that people are seeing this information. Is that
soft costs, right?
Right.
I didn't even factor that in. That's just hard costs. That's just printing and mailing.
I mean, when we were doing magazines, I would be a contributor on with a small C, but you'd have an AP journalist that was cranking out a lot of that content. We had a graphic designer. We had different government affairs communications embeds who would be providing information, and it would take up a decent percentage of our bandwidth. Anywhere from maybe 10 to 50% of our bandwidth was going into creating content that we repurposed across many different platforms, but the magazine was one of them. And so, especially when you're dealing with a smaller group of professional resources in a smaller state association, I think that's a really valid consideration point, that proper use of technology can really lower the labor demands to produce value on those platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, mobile is just one of them, but there's definitely a lot of ways, basically leaning towards, and you can really, in order to have that situation where you could make the most of a mobile application, that will require a member login, right? Otherwise, anybody in the public can just download and access your information. That's what you do not want, right? Because your competitors will be doing the same thing. And I'm saying competitors for restaurants, so labor unions, some of those folks that are lobbying for things that might not be restaurant or hotel friendly, things like that. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And having that member access kind of gives you the confidence that this is trusted information that applies to me in the way that I want it to be. It's not a Trojan horse from a labor union or whatever that happens to be.
Correct. Yeah. So, All right, so we're at our time now, Andy. This was you think, talking about members, non-members. Okay, but it's a very exciting topic. I mean, because it has so much implications on the restaurants and the hotels and the associations. It really does make for the if done properly, it could be a big deal of why people join the association.
Yeah, you mentioned Amazon Prime earlier, and but right before every Christmas, I start to wonder: do I really need to be on Prime? I'm not watching the videos. What I'm ordering. So there's this decision prospect that happens to me once a year, and that's just putting it in basic speak. And so that I go down every year, and I imagine that it's probably not that different for a restaurant association. And I think having a communications platform that is constant enough to show the value through the year, that when people get to that Amazon Prime around Christmas, do I renew or not? When it comes to their membership renewal, you want them to be able to see that value, and it's not just this passive check that gets written every year. You want them to feel good about that, right? And to see the value that's there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, any final thoughts, Andy?
No, actually I don't. Usually we come across this point, it's like, yeah, I wish I would have talked about this, but I feel like we painted a three-dimensional word picture.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So anybody watching it throughout the week on the CSRA and any of the other channels, if there's anything that you want Andy and I to try to tackle or answer your questions on, for the next show, probably next Friday is what we're looking at. It's looking like Fridays is a good day to do this. We will definitely address them, and we could even invite you to join us and help you out directly. So please reply back on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're at, and just let us know what we can help you with. But that's what we're here for. So with that, thank you so much, Andy, for your time. Great work, and for everybody else, have a great week.
Yeah, thank you, Lex. Thank you, audience.